I'm Larry Fedoruk, and this is Later That Same Life. Welcome to a new episode of my weekly podcast, available on most major platforms and my personal podcast YouTube channel. Subscribe now.
Season 3, Chapter 12.
Social contracts.
I've been thinking a lot lately about social contracts. How many do we live under? How did we arrive at them? And why lately are so many people breaking them, not abiding by the clauses and conditions of certain social contracts? I've been trying to step back and see the big picture of social contracts by way of understanding why so many people seem to be tearing them up and burning them, in some cases, literally. When you dive into topics like this, what you usually find, as I did again, is that deep thinkers from centuries ago already helped form the principles of modern society. When you talk social contracts, three names usually come up. In order of their appearance on the planet: Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau actually coined the term in his book, The Social Contract, in 1762. I'll talk a little more about them later on, but first, what is a social contract? Sometimes referred to as social contract theory. Also part of something called contractarianism. Ooh, big intellectual terms. Well, kind of. The term social contract is more common lately, and it's used in a lot of different contexts, but, as I just pointed out, around for centuries. A social contract is really just the relationship between the legal and moral rights of an individual in a representative democracy. A social contract establishes not only the moral but the political rules of behavior. The United States Constitution is often cited as a prime example of an explicit social contract, as would Canada's Constitution, our Bills of Rights, laws and statutes on the books, and so forth. They are all examples of social contracts. Contracts because they are agreements, and social because they come from the will of the people. In other words, not from a king or a queen or a magic man in the sky telling us how we should act. We, the people, generally agree on these rules. We will all, for the most part, try and behave in this way. Rules come in two forms, basically: the can-dos, those rules that guarantee our rights to do certain things, and the other is the do-nots. There's a lot of do-nots. Many of them you'd think would be common sense, but since that can be a rare commodity, we need the rules, the do-nots. And we also have a general agreement on what to do with the people who ignore some of those do-nots. Rule breakers, troublemakers. We say they must be punished as a deterrent not to break the social contract again, and if severe enough, separate them from the rest of society for a period of time. You go to your room and think about what you did, mister. Though my can-dos are protected by the law, not supporting my can-dos is not as bad as doing one of the do-nots. And here's another thing about social contracts. Not everyone is going to agree with all of the rules. But these contracts imply that you will be better off following all of the rules, even the ones you don't like, if everyone else does the same. Rules, rules, rules. Oh, wow. You're bringing me down, man, with all your rules and regulations. Why can't you just let me live? Let me be. I just want to be. Well, imagine for a second that kind of world. No rules whatsoever. Complete freedom. What would that feel like? What would that mean? Complete chaos. You are not restricted by anything. but you're also not protected by anything, and neither is anyone else. Anarchy. I imagine the world was like that once, but then this other thing happened. It was called civilization. And again, we generally agreed that a few rules would help most of us live longer. We would give up some freedoms in order to gain more security. How much do we lose of one to gain more of the other? Well, that is still a debate that goes on. Social contracts came into being in the Age of Enlightenment, basically most of the 1700s. The Age of Enlightenment came on the heels of the Renaissance and was followed quickly by the Industrial Revolution, which begat the Gilded Age and the Romantic Era, followed by war, Roaring Twenties, Great Depression, war, Baby Boom, Space Age, Information Age, and Digital Revolution, bringing us to where we are today, the era of dumbing it down for the masses. It's a great time to be alive. Social contracts by that name go back about 300 years, to the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment, and those three guys I mentioned earlier. But we do have to go back further and tip the hat to Socrates. Socrates is considered the father of the social contract. Socrates was talking conceptually about this in 400 BC. I tell you that Socrates just never quit. I bet you he couldn't turn off his brain if he tried. Must have been a pain in the ass going for a beer with him, though. All right, Socrates, we get it. Philosophy, democracy, theology, logic, ethics. Can't we just talk about sports for a while? I hear they're introducing discus into the Olympics. Demonstration sport, what do you think? I don't mind tipping the hat to Socrates, but when it comes to social contracts, I don't want to go back that far. Let's just go back to 300-some years, to the Larry, Moe, and Curly of social contracts. Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who again actually coined the term. By the way, I call them the Three Stooges of social contracts because that is my highest compliment. They got busy and got it said.
Get busy, go ahead.
Why did social contracts begin in the Age of Enlightenment? Well, we were getting enlightened. We were less and less enamored of the kings and queens. As a matter of fact, toward the end of the age in 1776, there was the true beginning of a new experiment, a democratic republic to be called the United States of America. What? A new England? Meanwhile, over in France around the same time, seeds were being sown for the French Revolution. That was coming in their not-too-distant future. So, kings and queens, get out of here. Also evolving in the age was the principle of separation of church and state. This is what I mentioned near the beginning of the podcast. People were starting to believe that they did not need a magic sky man or kings and queens to tell them how to run their lives. We will be the bosses of us. And as a social entity, enter into an agreement, some sort of contract that says we will obey the rules as listed. We will be better off. This is where Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau come in. The latter, from France, lived in the time of the Revolution. The other two from England. They didn't all live at exactly the same time, but their lives mostly overlapped. I'm sure Locke would have read Hobbes. Rousseau would have read both the other two. These men brought us social contracts and other ideas we still basically live under to this day. They differ only slightly. Thomas Hobbes, whose most famous book, Leviathan, chronicles many of his beliefs. He thought that man was inherently self-destructive, and that if left to his own devices, would live in a brutal state of war and adverse condition. Therefore, he thought that man needed a ruler, perhaps a dictator, who would keep them safe from themselves and other dangers. All they had to do was enter into a contract to obey his rules, again giving up some of their freedoms for security. Still, in modern times, we have seen examples of this. Countries that have many opposing factions, maybe even warring ones, have survived for many years under a dictator. People gave up a lot of freedom, but at least there wasn't gunfire on their doorstep. Iraq, Libya, Egypt, once freed, fell into greater chaos. Now, don't get me wrong, I will always choose the will of the people over a dictatorship. All I'm saying is that with Hussein, Gaddafi, and even Mubarak, we saw modern examples of what Thomas Hobbes spoke of in the 1600s. Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau believed that morality was not a birthright, nor was it handed down as some divine gift. They believed that when you are a free, rational, self-interested group of people, morality would naturally emerge, because there was a greater benefit to it, a greater benefit in cooperation as opposed to confrontation. Hobbes just felt that man would become destructive if these basic principles weren't constantly reinforced and policed by a ruler, a Leviathan. John Locke was the man of the tabula rasa, the blank slate. He believed man was born with a blank slate, and if left alone, a society would naturally emerge for the betterment of all. He believed in a limited government, whose power came from the people, and social contracts they would enter into. Some of the wording John Locke has used in his philosophical writings can actually be found in the U.S. Constitution. Locke believed in representative democracy. Rational people elected rational leaders to make the laws. And if the people felt the leaders were no longer working in their best interest, the people had a right to revolution, or at the very least, a swift and fair election. According to Locke, government protects life, liberty, and property, and the people do the rest. Now to Jean-Jacques Rousseau. His most famous quote, "Man is born free, but is everywhere in chains." Good one, JJ, but what does it mean? Well, he believed that man is basically good, but it is society that corrupts. We are born free, but all these different social contracts that we institute and the way we police our rules can cause a power imbalance, which leads to a struggle, which then can lead to the self-destruction that Hobbes talked about. Rousseau believed that the rules should be made not by the elected leaders, but by the people themselves. And if you didn't get the rule you wanted, you still must side with the majority. All people would govern themselves by the general will. So Hobbes wanted a dictator, Locke wanted a limited representative democracy, and Rousseau wanted to live on a commune listening to the Grateful Dead on his headphones.
Good morning.
Some sort of Woodstock nation, perhaps.
What we have in mind is breakfast in bed for 400,000.
We see examples of all three of their models around the world today. The most popular system, the one we live under in North America, is John Locke's idea, representative democracy. It is nuanced country to country, but that's what it is, and limited government. The amount and limit of government, indeed our governments, because we have three levels, seems constantly under debate still. Each, however, require these social contracts. I mentioned earlier that our constitutions, our bills of rights, our laws are prime examples of explicit social contracts. In fact, we live under two main types of social contracts, explicit and implicit. And the difference between them is important. Okay, explicit social contract says, when you go into a convenience store, you can't just steal everything you need. You must take it to the counter and pay for it. When you are walking out of the store and somebody is right behind you, implicit social contract says, you hold the door for the next person. If I breach the first contract, I may go to jail. The second one, however, not as likely. Most of our courtesies and etiquette are implicit social contracts. When it comes to explicit and implicit social contracts, let me toss out this curve. If you are a natural-born citizen of Canada, you never exactly agreed to follow the terms of the explicit social contract imposed on you, the one that lists all the rules and laws of the nation. Most of them were written before you were born. You may have been schooled in them and peacefully go along, but to any natural-born citizen, all of this is actually an implicit social contract. If you are moving to this country and want to be a citizen, then you must explicitly agree to live by those same laws and rules that the other guy has taken for granted. If you don't, you may be asked to leave. Maybe this might help answer what we see a lot of today, a disregard for a set of rules we feel we had no say about. Breaking a social contract we technically didn't agree to. And of course, one will always say, well, if you don't like the rule of law, work to get it changed. The problem there is that we don't actually live under the J.J. Rousseau model of a giant commune. Hey everyone, meet me around the campfire at 5 and we're going to change the rules. We live in the Locke model, representative democracy, so we must wait for elections. And even then, maybe no one is around to address my rule change idea. And the process is bogged down with bureaucracy and favoritism. At some point, revolution may seem like the best way. Certainly quicker and definitely louder. Revolution can take the form of protest, placards and megaphones, chants and slogans. At least then we get noticed. Natural-born citizens. Social contracts don't seem to be that explicit to them. It's like we coexist in two distinct groups, both living under the same contracts, but we view them differently. Maybe that's why some say rules are made to be broken. I used to think that. Young, naive, ready to change the world, break all the rules, man. That's the way we're going to get change. Of course, rules aren't made to be broken. Rules are made to be followed for the betterment of the large group. That's the social contract. We change the rules that aren't working for us. This is where we can see Rousseau's point. Society corrupts. Some of the rules have been made for the benefit of only a few. The power imbalance seems more like an anti-social contract. Those are the rules that need changing. And sometimes they can be the ones toughest to change. Often we'll call that speaking truth to power. It's a good idea, except today, what is truth? No one seems to really have an exact idea. And power, well, money is power. So speaking truth to power ends up sounding like a bunch of people babbling incoherently at the rich. We change clauses in our social contracts all the time, both the explicit and the implicit. Social norms change and evolve. The written and unwritten rules that go along change as well. Even without revolution, there are many social contract clauses we choose not to obey. Speed limit? Who does that? Since nobody was following it, we even changed it. Still, almost no one. We cheat on our taxes, on our significant others. We tell lies. We jaywalk, roll through a stop sign, eat some grapes in the produce section, don't tip enough at the diner, wear white after Labor Day. Well, what I'm saying is that we constantly break social contracts, big, medium, and small. And sometimes we even try and rationalize it afterward. Often that's where whataboutism comes in. Well, what about the other guy? Well, what about this rule? Well, what about that? We're not talking about that. We're talking about this. Let me just say that the ability to rationalize doesn't necessarily make you rational. Most of us will try and break a big rule, even if it's just a little, and a lot of little rules a big amount of the time. All three social contract philosophers agreed. Remember your Larry, Moe, and Curly? That free, rational, self-interested people will see morality grow out of the benefits of cooperation. All elements are key. January 6th insurrectionists seemed more self-interested than rational. Anti-vaxxers aren't willing to keep the social contract to the betterment of the greater mass. Where is the morality? Not sure if they are just rule breakers in general. We all know somebody like that. They think all the rules just don't apply to them. Or maybe they just like to pick one or two rules and illogically not follow them. Not sure why one rule seems to get to some people and not others. They won't go the wrong way on a one-way street, but they can't seem to follow a directional arrow in a Walmart aisle. Implicit social contract says get a vaccine for the greater good. Explicit social contract will be a vaccine mandate. So you may not like the mandate idea, but didn't you just bring it on yourself? With rights come responsibilities. With freedom comes obligation. When the majority wants change, they will get it. Every major revolution in history backs this up. But when a select few allow their self-interest, differences, or defiance to negatively affect the lives of the majority, then social contracts aren't worth the paper they're written on. Every day, the majority of people follow the basic premise of social contracts. We give up some freedoms for greater security. Those who choose to disobey all the big rules should expect to trade their freedom for maximum security. Was Hobbes right? Do we need a dictator? Maybe a benevolent one? Or at the very least, some forceful leadership? What about Locke? The right to revolution. Rousseau, born free, but society corrupts. A social contract is the relationship between the legal and moral rights of an individual and used as a freedom-security balance for the majority. Maybe part of the problem is that life is not one social contract. It is many and many of them, that if on paper would fill file cabinets that would fill many rooms. I'm hoping that at least one person listening who did not understand the social contract concept will decide now to be a human being and sign here and here and initial here, here, and there.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.